cheque for £7 million. Greenham Common, the site of some of Europe's biggest peace protests, was formally handed back to the people of Newbury. In the coming months, the fences, which kept thousands of anti-nuclear campaigners at bay during the 1980s, will finally come down. Malcolm Stewart has the details.
The Air Ministry paid Newbury just £7,485 after they requisitioned Greenham Common in 1941. Since the United States built all the facilities here, this cheque for £7 million represents a good profit to our Ministry of Defence. And it still took a hard fight to persuade Whitehall that a charitable trust should be allowed to buy the former cruise missile airbase.
It was very hard because in the early days they seemed to put up a lot of obstacles to the council having an interest in it, and of course we were very worried that they might do some deal with a private developer and would have completely overridden the planning process.
But this is the modern version of turning swords into ploughshares. Osborne Electronics exports telecommunications equipment to the Pacific Rim from the former base. It's one of 50 firms already operating here, and today's purchase by the Greenham Common Trust will treble the capacity of the industrial estate. But this symbolic payment of £1 by Newbury District Council will ensure that within 2 years, the 600 acres of runways, now being turned into hardcore, will again be common land.
In due course, I hope to be able to put some cattle out on the common. They'll be the first cattle on the common for over 50 years, and I'm sure it'll be a good thing when they're back there.
Newbury thought it would get the common back after VE Day. Instead, it became a base for American nuclear bombers. But it was in 1981 that the world's attention was focused here when the women's peace movement protested against its use as a cruise missile base. There are hopes of eventually using those nuclear bunkers as the centre of a museum of the Cold War. And indeed, Greenham does deserve an important footnote in recent history. Documents released in Moscow show that during the 1980s, the military commanders of the then Soviet Union were convinced that they could never defeat the West in an armed conflict. That was because Britain had allowed the Americans to station the cruise missiles here, despite all of the public protests. But the women involved in the protests still believe they were right and that their cause lives on.
I still think we need women to bring the world to its senses and not risk any more nuclear bombs ever being exploded.
But for the people of Newbury, the fences that have surrounded their common for more than half a century will soon come down. Malcolm Stewart at Greenham Common for Meridian Tonight.
Was NATO's nuclear front line. Greenham Common was one of the most potent symbols of the Cold War. Today, a new chapter opened in its history with its sale to a charitable trust. Most of the Berkshire airbase will be returned to nature. The rest will be used to create employment. Our defence correspondent Joe Campbell reports.
It was in May 1941 that Greenham Common was handed over by Newbury Town Council to the military. At the time, Britain was engaged in a battle for survival with Hitler's Germany. World War turned to Cold War, but few then could have imagined it would be more than half a century before Greenham Common was back in civilian hands.
Welcome. It's an historic moment that Newbury is at last getting its common back.
4 years after the Americans finally left and the deal was done, the military paid £7,000 for the common back in 1941. Today it was sold back for £7 million. Even so, wresting the site from Whitehall's grasp has been a long process.
It's been a difficult and a series of hurdles have had to be jumped. They've been steadily overcome, and I'm pleased to say that today we've done it.
The base's huge runway has already begun to disappear, broken up to provide the foundation for Newbury's bypass. The aim eventually is to return much of the site to green fields.
In a way, Greenham Common became almost a dirty word, and so the thought that we can actually turn it back to peaceful use and really show a real peace dividend, I think is something that everybody welcomed. And for a long time people were saying to us, as soon as the Americans had gone, people started to say, well, are we going to get the common back?
The built-up part of the site is already being put to more peaceful uses. Now a thriving electronics business, this was once the old commissary, the US Air Force's own supermarket that served the 2,000 personnel and their families based here during the 80s.
was very different to the way you see it today. And it took us quite a long time to come to terms with the idea that we could turn it into a proper facility. But it's worked out extremely well.
Lee Breach was a schoolboy when the Americans went, and with them the jobs of many local people. Now 155 are employed at this electronics firm.
It's just great. I mean, all these people getting jobs and that up here, and most of them are expanding all the time. I mean, there's about 3 big places like this on the base, and there's so many people just getting jobs.
Some things, though, don't change. The fire may have gone out of the nuclear debate, but the women's peace camp remains, as much a part of Greenham's legacy as the now empty missile silos.
Still to come in